Okay, so now we are rolling. Thank you all for making time to participate in this migration update. This is our last all-staff webinar before the big day when we go live in 2 weeks. We're going to cover some updates, mostly around notice testing, and answer some questions that we've gotten about notices over the past several weeks that we've been able to verify during our testing. And then we're going to talk about how to prepare for Go Live, what things you should have already done and are probably currently working on. And then we'll talk about what CPS is doing internally and what we also have planned for on and after April 17th. With all of our webinars, we started with our big project timeline, and I don't want to give up that tradition yet. So here we are officially and firmly in Go Live Prep, the purple section, which is the last stage of our project. It's been an awful long road to get here, and so many of you have spent a lot of time and energy doing your best to make sure the migration is going to be a smooth transition for your library, and I want to thank everyone for the past basically year of service that you've put into CCS and your community in making this migration happen. Jumping right into notices, we have had a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to cover them all, but if you have additional questions, please shoot them in the chat. The first thing I want to note is that carrier information for existing text message users has been updated in Symphony and will migrate to Polaris. Later today, libraries will get lists of users whose information we weren't able to update. It's a pretty small list, but for some of them, we couldn't find matching carrier information to map to. So we will be sending that list out. If you already had updated carrier information, we did not overwrite anything that you put in on behalf of your patron. As we move forward in Polaris, you will not be able to save a record, nor will patrons be able to update their record to say they want text message notifications unless a carrier is in place. So if a user does not have text messages marked on their account, you can, of course, save their record without putting in a carrier. But if they do want to receive text message notices, Polaris will not let you save the user without a carrier, so we shouldn't have any issues once we're on Polaris. We're also working on translating our notices. Our agreement with Polaris includes several different translations for, I think there were nine languages, and that includes PAC and notices. However, we've updated the English text for notices, and we want to make sure that we're updating all of the text so that our users will have the same experience regardless of how they've elected to receive their notices. We have some great volunteers working with us to get those translations up and running, and we will implement the translated text before we send out our first batch of notices. If you have any language knowledge that you'd like to share with us, the languages that we are still seeking translators for are French and Arabic. We have translators for Korean, Russian, Spanish, Polish, and Hindi. If you have any knowledge in any of those languages and want to participate in the translations, you can send a ticket to help@ccslib.org. And then finally, our PASS and CERC advisory group volunteers are helping us test delivery of notices. So we have successfully delivered notices in all notice types to some of our test users, and we're still working out a couple of kinks, making sure that email notices get delivered and that we have the right information for you to share with your patrons on who to whitelist if needed. And I'll show you some examples of notices as well. A question that we've received a lot is which notice types, so overdue, bill, hold, et cetera, come in which format, print, phone, email, and text. So I'd like to thank Anastasia at Park Ridge for helping put together this chart that outlines how patron preference comes into play. For notices, for overdue, bill, and hold notices, as well as fine notices, Notices are sent according to the patron's preference, with the exception of phone notices for bills and fine notices. These, if you have phone selected as your notice preference, you will receive those notices in print, or they will be generated for you in print. Reminder notices, which includes overdue notices, or pre-overdue notices, auto-renew, and then pre-expiration. Those notices are sent only via email. Pre-overdue, not overdue. If your patron would like to also receive a text message, they can do so if they mark the receive optional text message box. If the user has an email on file, they can check the box and receive an additional text message notification. If they do not have an email on file, they cannot receive the text message for reminder or pre-expiration notices. The system won't see them as an eligible patron and won't select them. Someone raised their hand. I don't know if that was a question that they had. You can, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat. I'm going to pause for a minute. So the short story is notices are delivered according to the patron's preference. Bill notices cannot be sent by phone, so those are going to generate in print instead. And then those reminder notices are email only with the option for an additional text message. We do have a question in the chat. It says, will we still have SBA for hold? SBA is a Symphony voice automation, so we won't have SBA, but we will have Polaris voice automation. So that means that automated calls will happen for hold pickup information. So when a hold comes in for a patron, if they've selected phone notices, they will get an automated phone call that says, your hold is available, please come pick it up. So it will take us probably a while to stop calling it SBA because I think it's in all of our heads, but the Polaris telephony will serve the same purpose. Okay, so we still have some more info on notices, so if you have questions, you can send those to the chat as well. To get an automated phone call, the user will select phone as their notice preference. To answer another question from the chat. Okay. We have another question that we're going to answer in a couple of slides. So how often will phone messages be sent? We'll cover that. I just wanted to show a couple of sample notices. So here on the screen is a sample email notice, and I selected this as an example because you can see that it bundled available notices for this recipient. They had one item that could renew and one item that could not renew, and that information was provided to them in their email as well as the new due date for the renewed item. It also lists the other items that they have checked out and if they have any renewals remaining. So email notices can be pretty robust. Text message notices are a little bit briefer. So here is an example of a hold pickup notice sent via text message. You can see it did truncate part of the title, but it did deliver the title information, the pickup location, and the hold until date. Third question in the chat was how often will phone messages be sent? Patrons can only receive one phone call per day. That's a setup of the system. So in our testing, we had users who had both a hold ready for pickup and an overdue item. So they received one phone call that said, you have an overdue item and a hold ready for pickup. On those phone calls, it did not list the item title because the phone call is going to begin speaking as soon as a human or an answering machine picks up. So we want to make sure that we're protecting patron privacy. For notices that are sent via email and text, it is possible that a patron may get more than one notice a day. While overdue notices are run once per day, hold notices can be run, are default to run about 3 times a day. So if a user does have holds that are trapped throughout the day, they may receive a morning email and an afternoon email that they have holds ready for pickup. With the phone calls, let's say that a phone call goes out for someone at 10 a.m., then an item is trapped for them at noon, they'll be notified of that second item or that noon trapped item the next morning. If you want to know if your phone calls were successful or if you had failed phone calls, there will be a failed call report available in the staff client that says here's the user information that we tried to call and what happened with the call that it didn't go through. You'll also receive, or your library will receive an email summary of notices sent. And at least a couple of libraries may have received those during our testing period. Another question that has come up, we had a pretty lengthy discussion about it at one of our recent circulation meetings. The system is set to deliver a hold notice at the time the hold is trapped, and then a second reminder notice at 4 days if the hold has not been picked up, and then a third notice if the hold expires and is then subsequently canceled by checking it in. Libraries do not have to send the second hold pickup notice. If you want to opt out of that and have not done so already, just open a help ticket with CCS and we can turn that feature off for you. So a user will receive a notice when their hold is ready for pickup. They will also receive a notice if their hold expires on the hold shelf, but you can opt out of that second hold notice. Ooh, we have another question in the chat that I do not know the answer to. How many times does phone notification attempt a call? So I'm going to see if CCS can answer that in the chat. Otherwise, we will follow up with that after the call. Okay, it looks like we'll need to verify with Polaris and follow up. We have another question asking if we will know the IP address or domain of the Polaris email server that will send emails out. So they want to add the from address for notices to our SPF DNS records. That's a great question. We will follow up with that after the call as well. So if a library wants to configure their domain and DNS to allow notices, will need an IP address. I'm assuming that nobody from CCS has this information sitting in there ready to send in chat. So we'll follow up and email that to the IT group as well as our newsletter. Additional notice questions. We do have notice documentation available on the portal. So learning.ccslive.org notices. We'll add this chart and these Q&A and the additional Q&A that we are getting in this chat. We do have another question in the chat about which phone numbers we'll be dialing out. The phone lines themselves are not changing. So whatever the phone number that your staff or the phone number that your patrons call in for inbound options will remain the same, and our outgoing lines will remain the same. They show up on the caller ID or they're registered for caller ID as your public library or public library. So that will not change either. Another question in the chat that is when will when will notices run after GoLive? We are anticipating running notices on April 18th, and in a little bit we'll talk about some more GoLive project timelines, when will certain things happen, but we anticipate running notices the day after GoLive. So patrons won't be getting notices on the 17th, but they will get them on the 18th, or that is our intention. Another question, do overdue notices have to go by phone? If the patron has selected phone as their notice type, they will receive their overdue notices by phone. A couple of additional questions. If an item is picked up today, will the patron still get a phone call the following day? No. If a hold is trapped, like Tuesday at noon, and the patron happens to be in the library, picks it up Tuesday at 3, when the phone calls run the next day, they will not get a call because there's not a hold on the shelf for them. How many print notices will patrons receive per day? That is also a good question. I do not know if the print notices batched the same way that the email notices did. So it is possible that a print notice would generate for a patron more than once in a day, but library staff have a little bit more control because you go in and grab the print notices. I'm going to ask CCS to follow up on that in the chat and let us know if we need to do some additional testing and provide more information via email later. And I'm taking another pause because we've had a few questions, and I want to make sure if someone's typing, they get a chance to have that question in. Yeah, so we have a comment that currently notices are a little bit more nuanced. Some notices with Symphony maybe go out with an automated phone call, while others do not. Polaris works a little bit differently, and we can either set notices to go out by patron preference, or as a group decide this notice is only going out by this one delivery format. So if patrons select that they want phone calls, they will get phone calls for all of their notices except for bills and reminders. There's no option to say we're going to send overdue notices without phone calls, but we are going to send hold notices via phone calls. So this is definitely a functionality difference between Symphony and Polaris, and it's definitely more in the all or nothing category. Okay. So we're going to do some additional testing on how print notices do or do not batch, and we'll post some examples of those to the portal as well. I'm going to move on, but if we have additional questions on notices, you can go ahead and add them in the chat and we can come back to them if we need to. So I want to talk about preparing for GoLive and some tasks that are happening at CCS and some tasks that should be happening in your library. So March, we had two different deadlines. We had a March 9th deadline, which was to submit PAC work that CCS has to do. And we had a March 15th deadline for sending in new issues for data testing. So CCS staff have been working to resolve all the tickets submitted before those two deadlines before we lose access to the database. So you've probably been hearing a lot from us over the past couple of weeks. We understand that not every issue was caught before March 15th, or that maybe some changes to PAC work came up after March 9th. And those tickets that you're sending in are not disappearing into the ether. We're going to continue to work on those and resolve as many issues as we can before GoLive. And then we will, of course, be continuing to do PAC work with libraries after GoLive and continuing any sort of data work that we need to do once we're up on our new system. So the work with CCS doesn't necessarily stop just because our deadlines are passed, but we are prioritizing tickets that have come in ahead of the deadline. We're also this week continuing notice testing to give some more information and answer some more of these questions that you are all asking. And then we're continuing our preliminary integrated e-content setup, and I'll talk a little bit more about e-content later on in the presentation. We do have another question about notices. If the call is unsuccessful, how will we be notified, and what if the phone is out of order or the message box is full? Libraries will be able to access a failed call report that will list any call that didn't go through. So if they want to follow up with maybe a manual call or send an email or otherwise contact that patron, or even place a verify information block on their account to say that you need to update their phone number, you'll be able to do that. So in terms of preparing for GoLive, we've got these ongoing pieces that we've been working on. This week, we're also updating a lot of Symphony data that we want to make sure makes it into the Polaris migration. So we talked already about upgrading or updating SMS carrier information. We're also updating the target audience fixed field, so our existing data is better aligned with the decision made by Database Management Committee on which of those target audience fields or values to use, and the guidelines provided by SCRAP on how to implement that decision by database management. We're also working on shadowing some items. In Symphony, we can shadow or suppress content from the pack at 3 different levels. We can suppress a bib, a bibliographic record, and everything on the bibliographic record. We can suppress a call number, and that call number might have 5 or 6 items attached to it, and all of those items would be suppressed as well. Or we can suppress or shadow an individual item. Polaris doesn't have that middle call number level. You can shadow things or choose not to display in pack. You can suppress things at the bib level or at the item level. So in order to make sure all of the material that should be hidden from PowerPack is hidden from PowerPack, we'll be adding the shadow item flag to all items that are attached to a shadowed call number in Symphony. So you should see no change in your data in Symphony, and when your data comes over to Polaris, the material that you think will be should be shadowed based on Symphony will be shadowed in Polaris. We've also corrected impossibly high circulation counts. Libraries who had items included in this strange error were notified of all of those items and what their incorrect circulation count is and what the corrected circulation count should be. So we won't be carrying any items over to Polaris that have over 15,000 circulations. And then next week, we have a little bit more work to do on patron data. And again, this is to ensure that the data that is in Symphony appears in Polaris, that patron records in Symphony appear in Polaris the way that we want them to. So right now we have parent-guardian information in a couple of places in patron records. So information that's in the CO field of the address, we are moving to the parent-guardian field in extended information, since that is where that information is being pulled from for Polaris. For libraries that use unique management collection services, we have a list of excluded user profiles in Symphony, and we're going to add an N in the unique management extended information field for all patrons that are part of those user profiles to make sure that they're excluded from collections in Polaris as well. Any questions about these specific data updates or that CCS is working on? Okay. So next I want to talk about preparing for GoLive in libraries, and I'm actually going to jump out of PowerPoint find my mouse and come over to CCS Learning, our learning portal. So under migration information, we have our GoLive schedule, and this we covered in our last webinar. We talked about dates for data testing, configuring the server, data extraction and load, and today I want to talk about our GoLive checklist. So we've put together a few different checklists to help ensure all library staff are prepared for the migration. Most of the tasks on this pre-GoLive checklist that we're going to look at, you've been working on things like reviewing notices, working on data testing, but I want to hit on a couple of key tasks here. One thing that we haven't heard from a lot of libraries on is whether or not you'll be registering patrons during offline mode. If you are planning to register patrons during offline mode, please submit a ticket to CCS by the end of the day today, noting that you're going to do so and which workstation you're going to use to do that work. That workstation cannot be used for other offline transactions. So as we've moved into April, you want to make sure that all of your staff are aware of the GoLive schedule, the stop on Symphony changes for both technical services and public services. As a reminder, we cannot make changes to the Symphony database once we've extracted our data. If we look at our GoLive schedule, we see that we're going to be extracting our bib item and authority data on Sunday, April 8th at 9 p.m. So after that time, we cannot have any changes made to data. That indicates our tech services downtime. That includes creating or modifying bibs, items, or authority records. That includes creating brief bibs for interlibrary loan, and that includes changing the current location of material by checking things out to cards like missing, discard, or repair. The checkouts that you're doing during technical services downtime should be to existing patrons or to actual patrons, not to sort of in-house library cards that affect current location. We'll extract our circulation and patron data on the 13th after libraries close and then start the data load. So again, review that schedule. We've got more details on each of those steps on that page. If you haven't already, and a lot of libraries have already done this work, so don't feel that you need to stop everything you're doing today to go do these tasks. These are reminders in case you haven't. You want to ensure that all staff users can log on with their Polaris usernames and passwords, and that includes logging onto each workstation that will use the staff client, which may not be all workstations in your library, to make sure that that workstation name is registered appropriately. If a workstation is not listed with the right name in Polaris, you will not be able to log on to the staff client using that computer until we update the list. So please test that today if you haven't already. We've got other tasks here that are focused on testing, including testing data, testing permissions, testing which user logins can override blocks. This is a different kind of permission than in Symphony. Overrides kind of exist within the user. You don't have to put in separate codes. I have a couple of questions in my chat that I'm going to get into, that I'm going to answer in just a second, so I'm not abandoning you. If you're planning to use offline self-check and you haven't already contacted CCS, please let us know today that you are planning to use your self-checks in offline mode if your self-check has an offline option. We'll want to go over the procedure with you and make sure you have all of the connection information that you need, and that we're going to be able to get those transactions from you at GoLive. Okay. I'm skipping past some of these. Again, we've talked about them a lot. Here we are today attending our quarterly webinar. Some things you can do the rest of the week, if you need to complete testing, receipt, and hold wrappers to make sure that they're configured properly, you can do so up until the 5th at 5 o'clock or end of day. The same with creating templates. All of those need to be created that you want to appear in production on GoLive Day need to be created by April 5th. And this is another reminder to go ahead and remove those that you don't need to help keep our database tidy. The same with import profiles and pack customization. All the files that are in the pack custom folder will be moved to production. So you want to make sure that your files are in the right place when your pack is ready to go. If you haven't completed installation of the staff client on necessary computers, that should happen as well. Marcin will be sending out information on how to update the remote app for GoLive as soon as we receive it from Polaris. So you'll get that information to the IT group and in the newsletter as well. If you're not signed up for CCS News, you may want to consider signing up and or following CCS on Twitter. We will be sending updates on a specific schedule, which I'll go over with you in a little bit, through the CCS newsletter, and we'll be tweeting the links to those newsletters as well. So if you don't want to sit and watch your email all day, you can follow us on Twitter as an option. It will also be helpful for CCS to have a GoLive contact, a direct contact that we can, in the event of some sort of emergency where we need to speak to an individual at a library immediately, that we can reach out to rather than sending something out to the whole group in the news. I'm going to finish this section and then go to the chat questions. If you haven't tested your printer settings, please do so. As a reminder, the printer settings will not migrate from test to production, so you want to document what those settings are. We've got some information on the Learning Portal and a link here for you to access that, but you'll want to, again, make sure that you have settings set appropriately for the different kinds of desks or workstations that you have in your library, and make sure that folks know how to set those when it comes to April 17th or that you've assigned that task to someone. The same for test your printer label printers, and document your settings. And again, if you haven't tested your barcode scanners and RFID pads to make sure they're inputting properly, you'll want to do that before GoLive as well. This download offline files for non-GoLive offline will do post-GoLive, so you don't need to worry about this one. I'm going to pause here and go back to our chat. There's a question, when will we know what the final wording is on notices? We do have the review from the Circulation Advisory Group done, so we can send that information out or update it on the portal. I have another question that I'm not sure what they're asking. Its question is the workstation or terminal server user ID. For offline, we need to know if you're doing patron registration, we need the workstation name of the computer that is going to do the offline registration. Another question, when technical services goes offline next week, bib and item data is still accessible, correct? Yes, the bib and item data is still accessible, you just will not be able to make changes to it. But Symphony will still be up and you'll still be able to look at Symphony. We have another question that we may need to follow up on is in the print overdue example, or the print overdue notices, are patron addresses configured for a window envelope? That is a good question, and we'll print some out and make sure. The examples that I showed were email, so if the formatting didn't look right on the email, it's not intended to be mailed. But we'll confirm that in the print examples that we share with libraries shortly. So, Anita has raised a hand, so I'm going to pause here and see if there's another question in the chat. Okay, I'm going to keep moving, but I will watch the chat for additional questions. Technical services downtime is from April 9th to April 13th, or really till April 17th. Everyone will be down from the 14th to the 17th. During that time, if you haven't already, you can update your OCLC deep linking, and we can provide some additional documentation on that by the end of, or before technical services downtime starts. If you haven't already completed your call number survey, you can go ahead and complete that as well. That will help us with our call number split project that we'll be taking on after GoLive. And then we'll move into circulation downtime. So when we extract the data on the overnight on the 13th, when you come in on the 14th, you'll start using Polaris offline mode. If your self-check works in offline and you're going to be using offline with us, you'll want to make sure that your self-checks are all set in offline mode before you open on the 14th. You'll log into workflows with a new username that we'll provide you. It will be the same username for all departments, for all users, and all libraries, and it will be read-only access. During the offline mode, you'll check material out in Polaris offline, and if you log out every 2 hours, that will help ensure that our offline files are small, which means that they will load faster, and also if something happened to a file, you lose only 2 hours of transactions rather than a whole day of transactions. We do not anticipate anything happening to your files, but just in case. You'll set aside material that is returned during this period. Do not check materials in during Polaris offline mode. There's a question in the chat asking me to repeat something. Oh, a group sign-in. Yes, so after we extract the data from Symphony for our circulation data on the evening of the 13th, we will take Symphony down on Friday night and we'll bring it back up on Saturday morning. When we bring it back up on Saturday morning, it will be available in read-only access. We will provide a new login for everyone to use for workflows to get that read-only access. Your other logins will not work. So we'll provide you with that information before the 14th. We'll provide it probably in the Tuesday newsletter of next week. It will be an easy login. Everyone will have it. Again, it'll be the same across all libraries. And that's, again, just to give you access to look things up in Symphony. You'll be doing your offline transactions in Polaris, and you'll put in your own Polaris username. We have a question about OCLC deep linking. We're going to provide you with some additional documentation on that, but essentially you can update your OCLC profile. So when a user maybe does a search in WorldCat and it says your library has an item, they can click on the link and get directly to that item record. If you do not have deep linking set up, it will just go to your generic catalog page or maybe error out. So Tori's got it straight. For Polaris in offline mode, you're going to use your username, and we'll have a different login for Symphony, a new one. And Anita, I see your question, and I'll get to that in a little bit as well. We also have a checklist for GoLive Day. We've talked about a lot of these things. We went through this at our previous webinar as well. We will be notifying all libraries when the database is available. At that time, you'll want to clear your hold shelf, check in and reshelve items returned during the offline period before you run your pick list. The morning before you open, you'll also want to make sure all of your RDP connections are updated, update bookmarks to web-based tools, reconfigure your sorter if you have one, and do some initial checks to make sure everything's running as expected. We'll send this GoLive checklist out again in our communications that we're ready to go live. I want to talk a little bit more about GoLive communication because I think this is an area where people have a lot of questions. We have, your staff have been really successful at monitoring, watching for, and reading the newsletter, and we can tell because we can see how many people are opening it. So we're going to continue using MailChimp to communicate during GoLive week and weekend. I've put together an outline here, and we'll make this available on the portal as well, of when you can expect communication from CCS. I don't want people to be anxiously waiting for the next update when we're not planning an update. So Friday, April 6th, we will send our regular newsletter, and we will send it after the database copy is complete. So you'll know that Polaris Test is back up and available for you to use. On Monday, April 9th, we'll send an update in the morning to let you know that the first data extraction, which happened overnight on Sunday, was complete. At that point, the data load is going to begin, and we will send an update on Tuesday when the loading portion of that is complete and the processing begins. We expect that first processing to be complete on or before Friday morning, so we'll let you know when that first processing is complete, and we will issue a reminder that the second extraction is beginning. That second extraction is also the start of offline, so we will issue the same reminders that we've been sharing with you about what can and cannot happen during offline mode, and link back to our offline documentation so everyone has it fresh in their inbox Friday afternoon for when they come to work on Saturday morning. Things then start to get a little bit busier. So on Saturday morning, we'll send an update that Polaris has received all of our files as expected and that they've begun the load as expected. The load itself should be complete on Saturday before the end of the sort of regular business day, although some of your libraries may be closed by that time. And then the processing will begin. So we'll send an update that the final data load is complete and process begins on Saturday evening. And then processing takes the longest amount of time. Most of the time that we're offline is for data processing and indexing. So we will send 2 updates on Sunday that will just note that processing is continuing as expected. And then on Monday, we will send a 3rd update that processing is continuing as expected. And this will also then confirm the timing for our anticipated go-live on Tuesday morning, and also for the processing of offline files. We'll send an update on Monday evening when we start processing the offline files to let you know that that started on schedule and everything's proceeding as planned. That brings us to Tuesday morning. So on Monday, we'll have confirmed our anticipated time for the database to be available. And on Tuesday, we'll send another announcement at that time to say, yep, the database is available. Please start your day of tasks. In that newsletter, we'll remind you what those day of tasks are and how to get help if you need it. We anticipate sending 2 additional updates that day. Whenever we have a big project like this, there are probably some bumps that we'll hit along the way. So we'll do our best to keep everyone notified if those bumps might affect multiple libraries. So those are the kinds of things we'll send in Update 1 and Update 2, as well as updates to any post-go-live work that we've kind of flagged to continue. On Wednesday, April 18th, we will send 2 updates, kind of a morning update and a late afternoon or early evening update. And then we anticipate getting back down to 1 update on Thursday and Friday. We'll continue our 2 newsletter a week schedule for the next 2 weeks, and then depending on how the process has gone, how much data cleanup we have left, we hope to resume in May our regular weekly newsletter. While we're sending all of these updates, you will want to communicate to us as well. And we have some guidelines that we'll share, again, in our newsletter and put together in kind of a one sheet for you guys, when to call CCS and when to open a ticket. The short story is you should call CCS on April 17th or after or during offline weekend if you're unable to circulate material to patrons. So if you cannot log into LEAP or the staff client, if you cannot check out materials or place holds, or you're blocked from doing some sort of essential job function, if you have front desk printer issues, like receipts are not printing as you're checking out to patrons, if materials checking out for incorrect fine codes or loan periods, or if patrons are blocked from checking out material they should be able to check out. We want to make sure that when we're live and we're circulating to patrons. So we want to prioritize anything that would impact the patron's ability to get material that's already sitting there waiting for them. Similarly, if PowerPack is down or not accessible, meaning that it cannot search, log in, or place holds, please call us so we can address these issues as soon as possible once we're live. For other issues, we'll ask you to open a fresh desk ticket. Or if you maybe call with an issue that isn't as urgent as some other issues, we'll open a fresh desk ticket for you. Things like incorrect stat codes, collections, shelf locations for a group of materials, those are things we can fix later. It will be very helpful and speed up our resolution of your ticket if you can include how to uniquely identify these records, either in Symphony or Polaris. That will help slow down some back and forth. If you're having issues with non-service desk printers, so again, not necessarily, your patrons are getting the receipts that they need, but maybe your labels aren't printing the way you expected, or transit slips are missing a field that you'd like to include, you can open a fresh desk ticket and we'll get back to you as soon as we can to help troubleshoot those issues. Or if there's PowerPack elements that need to be changed, like dashboards or carousels, please open a ticket and we'll prioritize those and get to them as soon as we can. CCS will have, we'll be staggering our start times around GoLive weekends so we can provide service later into the evening for you for the duration that you're open. We will have all hands on deck basically first thing in the morning on Tuesday, so we're ready for your calls and help tickets, but we won't be able to tackle every issue as soon as it comes up. So we do need to ask for your help in prioritizing things that are urgent and things that are important, but maybe not as timely or don't need to be resolved as quickly. So we will rely on you to help kind of sort these things out as they come in, and then we'll be doing some additional prioritization on our end. During this time, we will have not only CCS staff, but also our implementation manager from Polaris, and we'll also have Matt Hammermeister, who's the system administrator at Pinnacle, on hand to help us with tickets and issues during the day. So we are preparing for what we know will be an exciting and probably stressful day for some of our library staff, and we want to make sure that we're all on the same page about how and when we'll be able to resolve certain issues. I see some questions in the chat, so I'm going to pause and read those. One of the questions is about a specific directory where offline files live. So Rich, I'm going to follow up with you after the webinar. The next question is about running overdue and bill reports. And we'll follow up with you as well to make sure that you have access to the documentation that you need. Basically, when you are running overdue and bill reports, you'll use the staff client and use the utilities menu to access reports and notices. So we'll follow up and make sure you have all of that information at your library. A couple of more questions have come in. One is back to notices regarding overdue notices by phone. They do not say the title. They just say that they have items that are overdue and should be returned or items ready for pickup. If it's a hold pickup, it will tell you where to pick the item up, but in neither case does it list the title. We also have a question asking about work with outside vendors like Boopsy, Overdrive, Unique, et cetera. So I'm going to follow up with that one as we start talking about some of our GoLive Day and post-GoLive Day priorities. Okay. Questions about when to open a ticket and when to call us on the phone. Okay, I have some notes for follow-up for those chat questions that I haven't answered. I'm going to keep moving at this point and talk about some things that CCS is going to be doing on the day of Go Live and the days following Go Live. So on Tuesday, April 17th, libraries should be able to begin or resume their sort of regular operations. There are a couple of exceptions here. The ILL functionality, both the follow-on searching and the sort of export to OCLC, has not been fully tested, and we don't want to send library staff kind of off on their own where we don't feel that we've been able to provide all the information needed. So we do have some interlibrary loan training coming up next week, and we're going to go over some of these details again. But we're not implementing new interlibrary loan workflows on April 17th. So that follow-on searching piece won't be turned on because, again, it hasn't been working for a good portion of our testing period. And while we do think it is working now, we don't want to spring it on anybody so close to go live. So we'll have more details in those interlibrary loan trainings, and we'll send it out to the interlibrary loan group as well. But the short story is new interlibrary loan features will not all be in place at Go Live. So one question in the chat was, can you talk about your work with outside vendors like Boopsy, Overdrive, Unique, et cetera? So every library should have received a list of SIP vendors that CCS is aware of, and that is divided into two sections. One section or group of vendors CCS will work with to do your SIP cutovers, and another section libraries will have to work with to do the SIP cutovers. So what CCS has done is several months ago reached out to each SIP vendor to ask about their process for doing these cutovers and if they can work with CCS to do it directly, or if they would recommend that each library contact them individually. So that's how those two lists came to be. CCS has provided to library staff the SIP information that they need to provide to the vendors. For the library, or for the vendors that CCS is working with, we will be contacting them or recontacting them on April 17th to finish the SIP cutover, to say, okay, we're confirming our database is up and live, and you can go ahead and make the switch to the new system. We will be notifying libraries as those cutovers are complete, so you will not be wondering if your databases are authenticating against the old server or the new server. We've also been working with vendors that connect using the API and we've provided the API information needed to those vendors and their associated libraries. For unique management, we have sort of a separate multi-step process in place. So I'm going to get back to that one in a second. Gary, did you have a specific question about what's happening with SIP or a specific vendor? Okay, did I roughly answer your question? Yep, okay. So we'll be doing those SIP cutovers on the 17th and letting you know what's going on with that. We have several of you have sent in tickets that we've said, okay, this is the part we can do now, this other piece or this whole ticket we're going to have to tackle after go live. So we have those flagged in our system, and one of our major priorities on the 17th is going to be working on those tickets in addition to providing live support for issues that are coming up on the day. We will be, before notices run on the 18th, we'll be updating the translated and final notice text for all notice types and all formats. And then we'll also be confirming that the enterprise redirect is in place. So Marcin has been working with Cersei Dynex to redirect starting on the 17th from enterprise to PowerPack, because even though I know that you're all communicating with your patrons and publicizing things in your newsletter and on your website, there are patrons who just have it bookmarked and they're going to go right to enterprise, and we don't want them to be lost. So we'll redirect them to PowerPack. Another thing that will happen on April 17th is that we'll work with Unique Management to update the collection status for users currently in collections. We will not be running collections with UMS on the 17th. We will just be updating the statuses for users who are currently in collections. We will not be running unique management reports until May 15th, but in the interim, we will do 2 sample reports for libraries of these are the users that would be sent to collections under the current settings and exclusions. So we'll send the first of those reports out on April 30th, and then we'll give you some time to look it over, or that's the second report is April 30th. I should have put these dates on the slide, but we'll be sending you sample reports for Unique. We'll give you a week to review it. We'll send you another sample report, and then we'll actually start the collections process. What we don't want to do is send a bunch of people to collections who shouldn't be there. So we'll be doing some testing before pushing that big red button. Again, on the 17th, one of our main priorities is, of course, going to be providing support and troubleshooting to library staff. Then on Wednesday, April 18th, this was a question earlier, we're going to run notices for the first time on April 18th. So this will give us some time to do some triple checking on the 17th that user accounts are flagged appropriately. We're not going to be spamming people with duplicate notices, and we'll put in place the sort of lessons learned during our notice testing. So no notices will go out on the 17th. We do anticipate running notices on the 18th. You'll see the next several tasks on our list are all regarding e-content. So e-content in Symphony and Polaris work pretty differently, and we have to do we've already done some preliminary setup on the back end in system administration to get different groups, what are called resource groups, set up for go live. But once we actually are live on the system, we need to populate those groups with the right records. And that's not something we can do before go live. So we'll be starting with Access 360 on April 18th, and we should be able to complete those pieces, those Access 360 pieces on the 18th and 19th. And then on the 19th, we'll begin the Overdrive record load. Overdrive has a lot of records and a lot of complexity, so this could take us several days. So we have it kind of flagged from April 19th to May 5th as loading Overdrive records. And then on April 20th, we will do the cloud library sync and get those records going. So we hope to have all of that integrated e-content available for direct download in PowerPack by May 4th. However, all of your patrons will continue to have access to the e-content directly through the vendor's platforms throughout this period. So this is us loading the content for access through Polaris PowerPack. You know, your users can still go to Overdrive on April 16th, April 17th, April 20th, and still get their Overdrive records or Overdrive downloads directly from the vendor. This is for PowerPack integration. Once those integrated resources are loaded, and those, by integrated I mean those that provide sort of direct download, appear in the patron account when they're checked out, that sort of integration, when that work is complete or well underway in the case of Overdrive, we'll begin loading other well-loved and well-used resources like Gale Virtual Reference Library, Canopy, and Hoopla. And Kathy's been working out a pretty detailed plan on all of this. So we'll be able to provide you with some more documentation and any and instructions on any steps you need to take, although I believe a lot of this is going to happen in the office and you will not have to do a lot, which is pretty good. Additional tasks, we'll start the actual collections process with Unique in May. Our target to implement new interlibrary loan workflows, those pieces that aren't quite ready yet and need some more training, that will be June 1st. We'll continue to work with Polaris and libraries on EDI setup and launch based on the library's schedule as reported to us. And we'll also be working to relaunch web reports. So again, at GoLive, we'll start with sort of a more limited set of reports, and then we'll be building back up to the robust tool that we have now. Before I move on we have a couple of questions. I want to address a question that came in the chat earlier about access to Symphony tools. So the question was specifically around access to Blue Cloud Analytics. Access to Blue Cloud Analytics should continue uninterrupted until the end of our contract with Cersei Dynex. So you should still be able to access Blue Cloud Analytics until the end of June. We're not making any changes to usernames or anything like that. So if you haven't already and you want to run some, we'll call them legacy weeding reports to pull circulation information or like detail that you want to make sure you have in hand, you can continue to access Blue Cloud Analytics. Similarly, Director Station is still up if you're one of our staff members who's still using Director Station. iBistro is also still up, I think. So those web-based tools are still available. I'm going to ask Bob to check on iBistro to make sure we don't need to do anything with that. Another question in the chat, the download about integrated e-content. So the download link from the catalog will not work if the record is not there. If patrons see the record, it will work. Right now, we have e-content records in PowerPack that don't have a direct download option because we haven't finished that integration setup. But at GoLive, we'll be, and Kathy, feel free to jump in here if I'm leading anyone astray. At GoLive, we'll be migrating over the records that we have, like all those Overdrive records in Symphony, but then we'll be taking them out of Polaris, doing the integration pieces and getting that functioning, and then we'll overlay those integrated records with the more robust cataloging work that library staff have done on our existing Overdrive records. So right now, you'll see Overdrive material in PowerPack that does not work with a download, but once we are live, you should not see Overdrive content that doesn't work with a download. The same for 3M and Access 360. Gale Virtual Reference Library, Canopy, and Hoopla do not have direct download options, so you'll just see records. We have another question about reports, asking specifically about web reports that have been favorited within web reports. We are prioritizing those reports where lots of libraries have flagged them as favorites to make sure that there is an equivalent report in Polaris, either accessible in Simply Reports, or if it's more complicated to build, as some of those web reports are, that we would be including it in our relaunched web reports. Another question asks if historic web reports will be available for IPLAR. So yes, I'm not sure how far back web reports go, but for IPLAR, you certainly need the current year. So yes, we will not be deleting any data that currently exists in web reports. So I talked a little bit about some of the tasks that CCS is going to be working on post GoLive, and I want to also look at what libraries may work on post GoLive. It's not. One moment, please. Okay, so you're getting a sneak peek at a yet to be published post GoLive task list for libraries. There are a couple of things I want to touch on today's webinar before we kind of round out and publish this list. We already talked about acquisitions prep for EDI, and we talked about CCS doing some post GoLive data work. But libraries will probably have some cleanup that they want to do as well, or some things that they'll want to manually review and update. So we will be providing reports to libraries for suggested cleanup or lists of patrons to review. Some of those will develop in-house from CCS, and others will get directly as a result of the data load. We'll get what we call like an exceptions list that we can say, here's all the things that had a weird error. And CCS will work on some of those, and some of them we may also push out to libraries to say, can you please review your records that are on this list and take an appropriate action? We've also got those post-GoLive tickets, and we'll be working with libraries to complete them. And again, there may be some work that libraries need to do to help us resolve those. But a couple of pieces that I wanted to focus on are updating all of your URLs to point to PowerPack. Not only do you have your website where you probably list important URLs like how to search the catalog, but you may also have print materials that need to be updated and reprinted if there are references to enterprise or URLs that point to enterprise. The final piece that I wanted to touch on this sort of not quite ready for prime time list is checking your database logins with a newly created Polaris user. So we talked a little bit earlier about SIP cutovers and swapping from Symphony to Polaris. And one way that you can check to make sure that that swap happened as you wanted it to is to create a new user who only exists in Polaris. Because that Symphony SIP connection is not necessarily going to stop on April 17th. We want to make sure that we've got a cushion and that you know, all patrons aren't getting blocked from accessing a tool. So I would recommend that you do have sort of your test user who's a Polaris native user who you use to log into all of your databases to make sure you still have access. We have had some questions about non-SIP connected tools and databases. If you use an alternate authentication method, you may want to follow up with vendors, especially if you're not sure how it's authenticating. If it's doing something like recognizing a barcode pattern, no change would be necessary. But if you have any sort of back-end connection, we've talked about SIP and API connections, but if there's anything else kind of special cooking at your library, you'll want to be in touch with those vendors to make sure it's going to transfer and or give it a good test after go live to make sure we're not excluding any newly created users. Okay, any additional questions? In the chat, we have one question that CCS staff answered. Will web reports data be available from April 1st to April 13th? The answer is yes. Web reports will be up and accessible during that time. Additional questions? I have in my notes to check on iBistro, to check on directories for offline files. What additional questions can we answer for you today, or do you want to share in your chat? Will Rails deliveries continue? Long term, yes, although we have been in touch with Rails to pause delivery on the actual circulation offline days. So we'll send an email to the circulation list about that. So you will not be inundated with bins that you can't collect or process. Yep. So we have a report request. So if you have report requests, we can absolutely continue to provide Symphony reports. Again, we will have CCS will have access to Symphony post go live, so we can continue to pull historical or legacy stats for you. We may prioritize some Polaris work before pulling those stats, but if you have a request, please send it in to the help desk so we make sure that we can track and complete that request for you. We have another question about incorrect stat codes or other problems in Polaris. If we can identify incorrect stat codes, et cetera, in Polaris, would you prefer that we create a record set and correct them ourselves through batch change in the client or submit via help desk? If we're talking about post-go live, and I think we are, then you can absolutely correct issues on your own. Although if you open a help desk ticket, we can do a little research to make sure that it was not part of a larger issue. But absolutely, you can make batch changes to correct issues that you're aware of. A couple of more questions. Will all favorited web reports be recreated? Maybe not in their existing form, since I do believe there are some favorited web reports that, I mean, certainly the field names are different, but conceptually, the questions that favorited web reports answer will be answered with new reports. There's a question about e-commerce. Will the new credit card vendor reference a patron's library card number when a payment is received? Yes. The reports will include the patron ID, the item ID, the amount paid, date, time. So the patron card number is in there, yes. Any other questions we can answer on this webinar? Again, I'll point you to the GoLive schedule on the migration portal. In addition to reloading. In addition to that narrative that's available, we do have a quick bookmark of key dates and times if you want to grab this for a quick reference. It's sort of the broad strokes of what can happen when or not. Zion wants to know when the CCS-sponsored post-migration celebratory beach party will be held. As you are the only library with, or I guess you have the best beach access. Evanston, you guys kind of have a beach too. I think Zion's in charge of the beach party. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time. I'll stay on the line for a couple of minutes if there are additional questions that come in the chat. And I'll also be grabbing a copy of the chat since I know that there were some follow-up questions I want to make sure we answer and get documented. So thank you all for your time.